you would ask, was it a success or was it not? Talk to any POW, and I think Lee will vouch for this, that the Son Tay raid was a great success for the improved conditions of the POWs.
The Bin Laden raid was similar in that they crashed into the compound. One thing you guys all ought to know is that the Son Tay raid has been the model for raids ever since. It has been the model of how to pull off a raid because it was so well planned and so well executed, so well prepared for, that it's just been a helpful model along the way.
Well, good morning. It's great to be together and excited about a conversation with a couple of folks with different perspectives on an event in American history, but one that we can continue to learn from. Terry Buckler is the author of Who Will Go, which is a fantastic book, not just of the history, but of some of the life lessons that you weave in there too, both from your experiences in Vietnam and just your life growing up on a farm in Missouri and things your parents taught you and how all that came together. A lot of folks, I assume, don't know a lot about Son Tay. So why don't you just start and tell us a little bit about your early upbringing and how you came into special forces and then became a Raider.
All right, I'll give you the 30,000-foot flyover here. I grew up on a farm, actually born on the farm, and we had a small 80-acre farm that we raised cattle on, and mostly cattle and hogs. And on the farm, you kind of learn to do everything. That's just part of the farm life. And I was volunteered for the draft in 1969 and went to basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and did my AIT training there as well for combat engineer. From there, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. First time I'd ever flown in an airplane was from Fort Leonard Wood to Fort Benning, Georgia. And the next 5 or 6 times I was in the air, I jumped out. So not that I don't like flying, and it's just that was the way it worked. And after jump school, I went to Special Forces training at Fort Bragg. Camp McCall was where we did our jumped in there. Jumped in about 70 of us in my class at that time, and we ended up graduating about 41 out of a combination of 3 classes. And once you make it through Camp McCall, you then go to your group and you do your MOS training. I was demolitions. And of course, in Special Forces, you're cross-trained on the other 4 or 5 MOSs. So you get cross-trained, and I was assigned to 7th group. And I was up in Hanoi National Forest training, doing mountain climbing and rappelling. And I was working with a bunch of master sergeants, and because I was the youngest guy, so I got to go up and down the mountain a lot and do all of the rappelling to show how it's done. So I was the guinea pig, you might say, but it was fun doing it and good guys to work with. I was sent back to Fort Bragg to pick up some supplies, and a while back there, a buddy of mine told me that Bull Simons was looking for volunteers for some kind of mission. So I thought, well, Bull Simons in Special Forces is an icon, and I never met the man, but knew his reputation preceded him quite honorably. And so I went down to the little White House, which we called it there, the home of the 7th. At that time, the 7th and 6th were both stationed at Fort Bragg. And Bull Simons came on the stage, and it got deadly quiet. There was about, I would estimate, 500 or so people in. It was packed, and other career officers and career NCOs had came down to hear what he had to say. Bull Simons was a very direct individual. He was looking for people for a moderately hazardous mission, he claimed. And we would be back probably by December. And if you were interested, come back to the auditorium at 1300 hours and they'll do the interview process. And I was interviewed by 2 command sergeant majors. And obviously they asked me if some questions about my background, and they knew they had my 201 file. So they knew I had no combat experience and was kind of a green kid on the block. But they asked me if I could weld. And growing up on a farm, we had a neighbor that anytime we busted something, we'd take it up to Sam and he'd weld it. I saw Sam weld a lot, so I thought, yeah, I can weld. So I told them I could weld, and they never asked that. And they asked me if I could do scuba, had done scuba qualified, which I wasn't at that time. But they thanked me for my time, and I thanked them for the opportunity, and left there thinking, well, at least I got the interview. Went back to Natahala National Forest and did my mountain training up there. And our colonel called me in one day and said, pack my bag, that I was going to be on a mission. And so got pretty excited about that, came back to Bragg, did all the paperwork, got our shots and everything. And I had been on a couple of training missions before, but I'd never had to make out our will. And on this one, we had to make our will out, which I should have thought at the time, maybe that should have been an indication this is more than moderately hazardous. But being 20 years old, I wasn't smart enough to think that way. So I was just excited about being part of the organization. I was part of the advanced team. We went down to Eglin Air Force Base. Auxiliary Field number 3 was where we were stationed. And our job was to prepare for the other contingency group to come down later. When they went through the process of interviewing everyone, they selected 109 of us. And out of that 109, 56 actually were on the mission on the ground. And we trained for 3 months roughly. We started out, one of the things that we did as part of the advanced team was we created the mock-up, which looked like 2x4s with toilet paper wrapped around them, but it was a target cloth. And there was always a question whether they took it down every night because of the satellites and taking pictures. But the true reality was it took us about 4 or 5 days to build it. So there was no way they were going to tear it down every night and put it back up. So in the book, it talked about this, and one of the Air Force guys that was guarding that facility while we weren't there said that they did not tear it down every night, and it was still up even after we left for probably 2 or 3 weeks. They came in, we started the training, we did a walkthrough, and we went from walking through the process to actually running through the process, and then we started live fire. And so we were getting the understanding and feel of what it was going to be like. We had no idea what we were going to really be doing. We felt it was some type of rescue, but we really had no idea where or who. At that time, there were several aircraft sitting on tarmacs that had been hijacked, and we thought, well, maybe we're going to do that. And then we did about a month into it, they introduced the H-53 choppers, and we started the same process there. We would land, walk off the chopper, do our walkthrough on the camp, and then move from a walkthrough to a run, and then again with live fire. So we were getting the feel for what it was going to be like when we actually did it. Most of our training after the first month was all night training. We went through the 3 times a night, and it was a long night. The Air Force guys did a great job of keeping the chow hall open for us when we got back in about 4:30 or 5 in the morning in Fetus. And we each element had their own little segment of what was to be accomplished on the raid. As a part of red wine, I was the RTO for our element. Dan Turner, Captain Turner at that time, was my ran the security for red wine. There was Greenleaf, which was the assault chopper, and then Blue Boy, which was the chopper that actually was crashed inside the compound. Now, the reason they crashed that inside the compound, the intel wasn't really, they weren't sure what the guards had been told, whether they were, in the case of a rescue, were they to execute the POWs or not. So the planners felt like we had to be controlled the guards within a minute after hitting ground. And so that was one of the reasons they crashed it. They wanted to get the chopper down quickly. There were 3 guard towers at that time. We took out a couple of the guard towers on the way in with miniguns. And then the one tower that was still remaining was taken out by George Petrie immediately upon getting on the ground. And so they did a great job of controlling the guards before, and that's when they started going through the cells looking for POWs. And our job at the same time, when we were landing, just as we were setting down, we had also practiced an alternative. They said we could continue the mission if we had 2 choppers. If we lost 2 choppers, we would abort because we wouldn't have the manpower to sustain what we anticipated, or they anticipated, as far as what we would encounter. So as we were setting down, I heard on my headset, Plan Green, which was pretty exciting at that time, because Plan Green had 22 guys on it, and they had a lot of firepower with them as well. So from that standpoint, you know, we felt like we were going to be in some hot water there pretty quickly, which we were. And but because we had practiced this so many times and rehearsed it over 170 times, everybody knew exactly what it was going to do. So when we passed the word that we were going to Plan Green, everybody knew on the red wine element exactly what their duties were. Now, the Greenleaf people landed at a compound about 500 meters south of us. And to our knowledge today, we're really not sure, but there was a lot of talk that they might have been Chinese. They're training the NVA. So regardless of the Greenleaf ruined the graduating class down there pretty good. And the chopper pilot saw what had happened. He had drifted off. You have to remember, we went in without any lights, without any communications. And it was a long 3.5-hour flight. And we were flying just above treetop. We flying behind the C-130 that was traveling at 5 knots above stall speed. And they did a fantastic job of getting us in there without any, and we refueled in the air as well. So the pilots we had were just remarkable in my estimation. So we were on our way to the communications building. Dan Turner and I were a 2-man team at that time, and we were headed towards the communication building because we were only 20 miles from Hanoi. And they estimated there could be anywhere from 15 to 20,000 troops in the area that would not be happy with us being in their hometown. So when we got to the communications building, that's about the time we heard that there was negative items, which items meant code word for POWs. And so we were told to come back to our LZ. We had good intel up to a point. The CIA had made a mock-up of the compound called Barbara, and from pictures the SR-71 had taken. And we would go in with, when we weren't training or resting, and they had a little prism, and you look through the prism, and it was like putting you down on the ground just as though you would be there. So when you landed, you could orient yourself immediately, and it worked excellent. The other first on this mission was the fact that we used the new scopes. Our accuracy when we were practicing wasn't that good. Actually, it was pretty bad. And Bull Simons wasn't happy with that. So they found the single point scope, laser scope, and they ordered a couple of them in, and we tested them out. And our accuracy went up to about 90 to 95%. And it was a real value to the guys on the ground, those scopes. So once we realized that there wasn't any POWs, we called back our choppers. They had landed and let us off and went over and sat down in about 2 miles from us, and waiting for us to call them back in. And we called them back in, we loaded the choppers, and we were heading home. And we thought we were safe at that time. And Dan Turner, myself, and a PJ were sitting on the tail end of the H-53. And as we turned to go south, you looked over the lights of Hanoi. I mean, it was like, I couldn't believe it was this, I anticipated seeing something with, shacks, but it was lit up like any major city in the United States was. We had been in the air maybe a minimum of maybe 1 to 2 minutes, it seemed like. And all of a sudden our chopper took a dive, and we thought we were going down, and out the tail of our chopper flashed a big orange pole. And we asked, not having ever seen a SAM missile before, it was kind of interesting to see what one looked like up close and personal. And but our pilots did a fantastic job of dodging them and moving around them. And fortunately, we made it back with only one injury, or two, I guess. The Air Force, when they crashed the chopper inside the compound, the fire extinguisher fell off and broke the ankle of Sergeant Wright. And then Joe Murray got shot in the back of the leg on one of the guys on red wine. And other than that, we suffered no casualties, and they suffered several casualties. So you would ask, was it a success or was it not? Talk to any POW, and I think Lee will vouch for this, that the Son Tay raid was a great success for the improved conditions of the POWs. And is that kind of cap off?
Let's go to Lee, and if you're still there, I think you're there you go.
Oh, yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. So while this training was going on, some of that time you were in Son Tay.
Yeah, we moved out in July of 1970, just about the time they were getting rolling. And so there's been a lot of discussions about why we moved. Well, I'd been there the whole time Son Tay was open. I started in the Hanoi Hilton. I was a F-4 fighter pilot. My airplane was shot down in November '67, at least I thought it was. A few years later, I learned from another POW that we were probably the first of about 10 or 12 F-4s that were blown out of the sky by their bomb fuses. When the bombs came off, the fuse arm detonated and exploded, blowing the airplane out of the sky. And I think that's what happened to us, because less than 2 seconds after the bombs came off, you can feel the bombs come off the airplane, especially with 750 pounds. When they drop off, it kind of goes clunk, and you can feel the airplane rise up a slight amount. And within 2 seconds, the whole airplane was blown into 3 pieces, which is very unusual to be hit by any kind of enemy fire or surface air missiles or anything like that, for it to blow up like that. So That's probably what happened, but you know, it doesn't matter. It was what it was. When you're flying in those situations, things happen. And so I'd been spent the first 8 months in the Hanoi Hilton, and then moved. They moved about 53, 55 of us. It varied, but roughly about that number out to Son Tay. And in the summer of 1968, spring and summer of 68, I moved out there in July, and we had that group, and we were in 3 different buildings. 2 of the buildings were kind of end to end in a straight line, almost as one building, but they were separate type construction. And then my building was 90 degrees to those. Now we had to name things, of course, you know, the humor of things and how you named them sometimes was part of our way we dealt with things. So Son Tay, the buildings there, I lived in the cat house. Some of the guys lived in the opium den, and some lived in beer hall. So you can see it was all about an escape out of that situation in our minds. But they were good names, and they worked well for us. And the area where the guys landed, of course, was right out in front. I was in the beer hall, and it was right in front of our window. Now, our window was blocked up. They had blocked up, actually bricked up with mortar and bricks, bricked up all our windows so we couldn't see out. But they did not want us to communicate. They didn't want us to know that anybody else was even there. Of course, we had covert communication, and we would take great risks to stay connected. So all of that to say, we were there for a couple of years. Most all of us were there a couple of years. We did get connected through our communication. The summer, now this was the fall of 70. Now the summer of 69, just so you have an idea, torture was still very prevalent there. And in fact, the summer of 69, because of the hype, what I believe, and I think most people would agree, what I believe was the pressure coming on the communists, the North Vietnamese communists, by the American people, which was led by the National League of POW Families, National League of POWMI Families, mostly wives, and they got organized, and then they got the U.S. government to change its policy on how they were speaking out or not speaking out about our treatment and about the accounting of who is a POW, who's not alive, you know, of the people shot down, who's been captured, who's not. And then they started putting pressure worldwide. Some of these wives some of my friends' wives went to Sweden. One lady went to, I think, 15 different countries and visited the embassy, but also met with their country delegations to put pressure on them, to put pressure on the communists about our treatment. So that was happening from 69, early 69 through that summer. Well, to respond, they started torturing guys to sign a short one-page statement saying that they had received good treatment. And so they'd gone through the summer of 69 while the US was landing guys on the moon. We were in a fight for our lives over there. There'd also been an escape from another camp in Hanoi, the zoo camp. There were 3 main camps in Hanoi. Hanoi Hilton was the primary, the zoo was the secondary, and then the plantation was the third one. And then there were 3 or 4 camps over the years, 3 or 4 camps outside of town, anywhere from 20 to 30 miles away. And then at the end of the war, when the linebacker bombing started again, they put half of the POWs up on the Chinese border in kind of a stowaway. I guess we were the insurance if the U.S. wiped out Hanoi during that linebacker 72 bombing. They would have some guys up there, and they had 205 of us up there. But back to Son Tay. So that summer of 69 was really rough. But then Ho Chi Minh died in September, and it took them about a month to decide who the next leaders were when the Communist Party leaders got together. And finally, that happened in mid-October. And within 1 week, they stopped all the torture. These new leaders decided it probably wasn't in their best interest to continue that. And so what they were going to do was put us in camps, take some old barracks and stuff and make some good looking camps, let us get out and get some sunshine, and then bring the reporters in to show us the world how well they were really treating us. So that's why we moved out of Son Tay. Now, there was a low water situation there that summer, but I think that was just kind of a coincidence with it, because there'd already been almost 100 guys move out of their camps at the zoo, and some from the Hanoi Hilton into the place that we moved to, which is about 6 miles away from Son Tay, 6 or 8 miles away from Son Tay. Okay, so we moved out the summer of '68 to go to what I would call the showplace camp, okay? It had 4 compounds of about 50 to 55 guys each. So I think there were around 210 of us in these 4 compounds in the new showplace camp, which at that time was a little over half of all POWs. There were only about 350 or 60 POWs in those early years that were in Hanoi, in the Hanoi system that we were in. Most of us were aviators, by the way, because the guys who were captured in the South often died before they ever got there, living in those jungle camps. And there were some, probably 50 or 70 Army POWs in another camp, but we didn't have cross flow with them. They were isolated from us, and our system was isolated from them. So we moved in July. I think it was 18th of July, and 14th or 18th. We moved in on the 14th, I think moved out on the 18th. But anyway, we moved to another camp, which was, say, about 7 or 8 miles away. And that night in November, you know, we were all sleeping, and it was we were getting outside for many hours every day where we could exercise. We were doing push-ups, walking on our hands, getting good suntans. I mean, we were almost afraid that people would think we'd had it good for all those years. By that time, you know, I'd been there for 3 years. And so that night, about 12:30 or so, we heard these explosions. And we woke up because there'd been no bombing up there since the spring of 1968. So it had been 2.5 years since there had been any bombing attacks on North Vietnam in our area. So this was something big. So we jumped up and, okay, what's going on? We could hear airplanes, we could hear surface-to-air missiles. We looked out the window and we could see surface-to-air missiles launching. And so we knew something was going on, but we didn't know what, and we didn't know for sure. We had no idea it would be at Son Tay at that point. And what happened, though, was the next day, the look on the guards' faces was one of fear. And within 48 hours, they had moved us all back to Hanoi, to the Hanoi Hilton. Now, in the old days, when we were all going through there in 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, or until 70, the Hanoi Hilton, the top part of it, what I'll call the top part, the northern part of it, was where the American POWs were. And there was a big section called Little Vegas, the Heartbreak Hotel, and Ugai Village, okay, those 3 main buildings. Down in the southern half of that camp, which is now the Hanoi Hilton was built in the 1890s by the French. It was a Bastille camp that occupied an entire block, walled in, downtown Hanoi. The walls are about 12, 15 feet high and about 5 feet thick. So nobody ever escaped from that prison. It was like, you know, the Middle Ages. But that southern half was all Vietnamese prisoners. Now, the Hanoi Hilton had actually been, when the French were there, and even afterwards, it was kind of like the city jail. And it was still used as a city jail by the communists. And so it was convenient for them to start using it with us, but they still had probably 600-700 Vietnamese prisoners in the bottom half of that. Well, they started moving all them out and bringing us in from the showplace camp and from other camps, so that by within the next 2 months, they had 335 POWs all in that southern part of the Hanoi Hilton in 7 rooms, and then a few isolated rooms where they had the senior leaders. But most all of us were in 7 major cells that were kind of end to end with each other, and some of them went at about an angle, more like a 45-degree angle between us, but they were all connected by those outer walls. And with 335 of us. I went to a cell, okay, with 52 to 55 guys. And I was in there for the next 18 months. Some guys were in there as long as 2 years. I was part of the group, half of us that went to the Chinese border. Now, can you imagine, you've been in, the most you've ever seen at one time is 4 or 5 other guys in a cell. And for a long time, it was, for me, for some guys, it was nobody but themselves. They were solitary. Some were in 2, some were in 3, some was in 4. I was in a cell for 4 for a long time, 6.5 by 7 foot cell. You know, that's the size of a bathroom and a gas station. And for 8 months, and then I went to Hanoi, and I mean, went to Son Tay, and it was still a small room, but we had 5 guys in that cell, in a small, another small cell. Now we're in a cell, open bay. It's about 25 by 65, roughly about 1,800 square feet, with a pedestal about 30 inches high off the floor that runs right down the middle. Now, some of them were around the outside, but I was running down the middle with guys sleeping on both sides. It was to sleep on, to kind of get you up off the floor from the rats. And so there was a line of guys on one side and a line of guys on the other side, but there wasn't room for all of us on that sleeping pad, concrete sleeping pad. So some of us had to sleep on the floor. Now, we did have mosquito nets, and that was a good thing. So we strung those up. We had wires and down the center to hang them onto, and wire over on the wall to tie the mosquito net to. So for the next 18 months, I'm in a cell with 52, 53 guys. Well, that was really valuable because I was single, and I learned to live with somebody really close and get along with them. In my marriage, I've been married 46 years now. But what was so good about it was we got organized, and we had classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I taught beginning French, studied the intermediate French. I started Spanish and German. My goal was to get fluent in Spanish, fluent in French, and have a 2,000 word vocabulary in German before we went home. Well, the good news is I accomplished all my goals. The bad news is I was there long enough to accomplish all my goals. And but we went to Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday classes. We had special programs at night. Guys would tell movies. Some guy would give a presentation on architecture or wines and German wines in the valley there, and the rivers in Germany. Guys had lived all over the world. Some guys would tell us about being in Japan and what that was like. So it was just all sorts of, and we even had Toastmasters on one end of the cell 2 nights a week. Tuesday night we had informal, and Thursday night we had formal speeches and Toastmasters. So it just went on and on and on. We had a choir. A lot of us were doing physical things like walking on our hands and push-ups by standing on our hands, putting the feet on the wall and going up and down. And we had one guy that could do push-ups in a handstand without touching the wall. He was like an Olympic athlete. So all these different personalities, and most of the guys were all aviators or air crew. We had one guy who had been a PJ on a helicopter, rescue helicopter, pararescue special ops kind of guy, and a couple of guys that were flight engineers or mechanics on the helicopters, enlisted guys. And so we actually, in that Hanoi Hilton complex, when we went back in those big rooms, these guys had a workshop, an education course, and they put them through OCS or OTS, Officer Training School, for about 6 months. And when they came home, they got our leaders got Congress to pass a law allowing us the services to commission them. They were all Air Force, and so they offered these guys commissions, and these sergeants were commissioned and stayed in and retired as 2 of them were captains and 1 was a major when they retired. So it was amazing the kind of creative things that people came up with when you have to. We had a lot of very bright, well-educated guys, and good leadership. We were well organized. Eventually, we got some cards, and we had bridge clubs and or bridge tournaments, and a lot of guys played every day. And then every Sunday afternoon, we'd have a what do you call it? A bridge where you got different tables. You know what I'm talking about. So it was. Life changed significantly for us after the Son Tay raid. I guess that's the bottom line, because we moved back in there and had those kind of conditions. By the way, as I don't think I mentioned this, but when after the new leadership came in, after Ho Chi Minh died, they stopped the torture. I maybe I mentioned that, but that totally changed our lives too. So now, that was the fall of '69, but all that really didn't play out until early '70. And so by '70, we were starting to enjoy more of a live and let live life when the raid had occurred. But now back in that big cell with that live and let live life, we had a lot more talent to draw from. And it became even more live and let live. Although the communication stayed covert, we were talking through the concrete walls with a blanket wrapped around your mouth, and you're talking right through the wall. It would muffle it, and they couldn't hear it outside. And some of us from one cell to the other, like my cell was one of those that had an angle to the cell next to it. There were windows way up high in these cells. They had bars in them, but they were open windows. And so we would stand on that platform, that sleeping platform, and we could actually, with a couple of blankets folded up, I was standing there and I was using hand codes so I could say hi, TD today. We had shortcuts a long time before cell phones. TD, we, GOT, LTRS, period. Okay. So that's how we could communicate very quickly like that. And in fact, it was so fast that I had to have a receiver to store the information because I couldn't remember it. So and I was the second string communicator. The other guy, J.B. McCamey, was first primary guy, and I was a secondary guy. But in that cell, usually I was the communicator in every cell, the lead communicator in every cell I was in, because I grew up on a farm like my friend here, and so I'm very sneaky, and I'm a good risk taker. Fighter pilots tend to be good risk takers, otherwise you die because you're always right on the edge. And so I become the communicator, and it just kept me busy. But I couldn't remember all that. So this whole bunch of information is coming at me quick. So I'm standing up there and I just say it out loud. And one of the guys in my cell was a brilliant guy. His IQ was well over 160. And so he organized a memory bank. He called them his amoebas because each person would remember one piece of information at a time, only one piece of information. He would stand there and listen to them, and he would push them away. Go sit down over there on the floor, and we didn't have any chairs. Go sit on the floor over there and memorize that piece of information, and then come back in a few minutes. So we had about 10 amoebas, and he would line them up. And as I would throw out a piece of information like, commander says so and so and so and so, he'd push him away, go sit down, memorize that, and come back. So each amoeba might have memorized 2 or 3 pieces of information. And then that night, at the end of the day, they would debrief it to the whole room. But also, we had some guys on the wall down to the end of the cell with the adjacent cell, and they were passing that information through to them, who were passing it through to the cell on the other side of them, so we could communicate with all 335 guys over a period, of an hour or so. Messages could be passed from one side all the way to the other. And some of that was business, and some of it was just fun stuff, information. We would get into arguments about what year it was or who was the champion in the World Series of 1959 or something like that. And so they would send out a question who it was, and somebody would answer it. And so what came to be known as Hanoi facts, that means is somebody's sure it's true, but we don't know if it really is because we got no way to prove it. But for now, it's a Hanoi fact, and it's what we'll believe until we find out something better. So anyway, that kind of gives you an idea of what life was like after the Son Tay raid. And so we found out about 2 months later, in probably January, so February, there was some bombing up there again, just a little bit. And some guys were captured and they came in and they said, well, did you hear about the raid? And we said, well, what was the raid? And they said they raided Son Tay. When? Well, that was like November the 21st. Oh, that what that was. That's why we moved. So then we understood what had happened. So it took us a couple of months to find out. So that kind of gives you an idea of how it's really changed our lives. I mean, it had gotten better moving to that showplace camp, but wasn't anything like where we had all the 335 almost all the long-term POWs in Vietnam were in one camp with communications with one leader. And that made all the difference in the world. We called it Camp Unity. We had policies confirmed and all that sort of stuff. And it really helped us survive those last few years and come home in a mentally good place. We finally, living in close like that, we realized we had to get over our bitterness. We had to get ready to go home. And so week by week, month by month, year by year, we kind of decompressed with teammates who had gone through a lot worse than we had, and living with them 24 hours a day and hearing their stories. And we just kind of got rid of that, all of that pain and suffering from the past. We just kind of washed it away. So we came home ready to go. We didn't want to come home still in handcuffs to them because of our bitterness and our memories. And so most all of us were able to do that, thanks to the good old Son Tay Raiders.
Well, Terry, I think that's an awesome reminder that a lot of times we're having a positive impact and don't even know it. I'm assuming you guys flew out that night fairly disappointed and having no idea that you'd still positively impacted the POWs' lives.
That's very true. It was, you know, when we were first told what we were going to do that night, we were told to meet in the auditorium where we were at Tak Lee, and Colonel Sidnor and Will Simons came on stage, pulled down a big map of what was going on in of Hanoi, with a big circle around Hanoi and another circle around Son Tay. And that's when Bull Simons told us where we were going to do tonight. And it got dead silent in that auditorium for about 5 seconds. And then the roof went off and people were jumping up and saying, let's go get them. I mean, we were excited about the opportunity to go free our fellow warriors. And so coming home from Son Tay on the flight back was very disheartening for all of us. We were so disappointed. Had they been there, we would have brought them home, right? And there's no question about that. But knowing it wasn't until years later at some of our reunions, we realized what the Son Tay raid meant to the POWs. Not only did it help, it just gave them confidence that this country cared about them. And like Lee said, life got better for them, and that was in itself was a big move forward for them. So yeah,
it was a big deal for us, and we've enjoyed getting to know the Son Tay Raiders after we got home. We came home in February, March of '73. Over 60 days, we came home in 4 large groups of POWs released as the war ended. And that was February, March. And then just a couple of months later, maybe 6 or 8 weeks later, Ross Perot threw a big party in San Francisco and brought the Raiders together from all over the world, flew them in and flew us in, the POWs who had lived at Son Tay and a few of the our leaders, to San Francisco for a long weekend of celebration. And that was, you know, they had movie stars there. Red Skelton did a 30-minute entertainment. All the great movie stars are Western kind of guys. Clint Eastwood was there.
John Wayne.
Yeah, but we really were there really to meet the Son Tay Raiders, and we really got to know them and built relationships that have lasted 48 years now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's go to Drew.
I love hearing your story, sir. I really do. Both from your 5.5 years in Hanoi and as a POW. But Terry, your story, I'm fascinated by the fact that they brought all these people together. Terry, I'd love to hear your experience and how you all did team building, because you go from a bunch of people that were individually selected to come together as a team. What were some of the things you thought were the most influential way of getting all these people from all different walks of life and all different technical capabilities and personal personalities? What were some of the things you remember most in that team building?
Probably the camaraderie that was developed on our training schedule. Friday night fights. That was actually what was, we had a little few bar close by, and we would go down there, and you know, when guys get together, they get a little bit of beer in them, or they get a little braver or crazy. And but the thing that I saw out of that, though, was the camaraderie that we had and we still have today, and the leadership. Bull Simons was just an icon. I mean, and I remember one night we stayed in the old barracks back there, World War II barracks, and it was a big open bay, and you slept, you know, right next to each other. And we trained with ammunition, or our ammo and everything, the weapons, you know, we just hung them over the side of our bed at night. And one night, one of the NCOs came back, had too much to drink, and was decided he was going to go tell the bull how to run the ship. And needless to say, he was restrained by about 3 other guys. And the next morning, Bull Simons had him out on the parade field where we did our PT. His heels were locked at attention, and Bull was going up one side of him and down the other. He was basically had threatened the bull, and you don't threaten the bull. And but the thing that I saw out of that, Bull said his piece, and that was it. It was over. And they moved on, and that gentleman went on the raid with us and was an instrumental in the Son Tay Raiders as well. So you know, there's a forgiveness. There's the leadership that Bull showed to me was, you know, guys are going to be upset. Guys are going to disagree with you, but you got to have somebody in charge. And Bull was in charge. And there was about Dick Meadows was another icon in Special Forces, and Dick Meadows was the same type of guy. The honesty, the care they showed for their men. And I never will forget, you know, I was my first time in combat. And as we were, after we were told what we were going to do that night, we went over to this big hangar where we had brought all of our gear with us, and our ammo and weapons and everything that night, when we were getting ready to get on the C-130 to take us to Udorn. And all those lifer guys that had been in combat numerous times come up to me and told me, you know, whatever you do, don't hesitate. And you know, they kept telling Dan Turner, get this kid back all in one piece. It was like a family. And I still respect those people today because of what they showed to me was the type of leadership that I hope I could pass on to people that I am endeared to. So, but we had our ups and downs. I mean, people disagreed with certain things, but like I say, there's only one person that's going to make the call, and that was the colonel. And when he made the call, but he listened to people. I know I was doing guard duty because when I first went down there, we had cleared this building and they put checked it for any bugs or anything like that. Then we put 3 rows of concertina wire up around it, put a field phone out, and anybody that went in that building had to be escorted in by somebody inside the building. And Colonel Sidner or Bull Simons came by one day by himself, and he asked me how things were going. And he asked, I'm going to tell him. I said, well, sir, I didn't come down here to pull guard duty, because at that time I was pulling guard duty. There was 8 of us on guard duty. We rotated every 4 hours. And when you weren't on guard duty, you were training with them, trying to get on the team. And he told me, just hang tight, things are going to change. And 2 weeks later, they made a change, and I was selected to be on red wine. And it was probably one of the happiest days of my life. Just the fact that because of, I won't say it's because I was bold, but it was because I did ask and told him the truth. I wasn't down there to pull guard duty. I could have stayed at Bragg and done that all day long, but he recognized it and didn't hold it against me. So it was a good opportunity. I feel very blessed to have been a part of the Son Tay Raid.
I think in listening to Terry's, by the way, Terry and I were the 2 youngest. He was the youngest guy on the raid, and I was the youngest. I was the one guy at Son Tay was 3 months younger than me. So pretty much generally I was the youngest guy in all my cells in those days, because we didn't get any you guys after 68. See, it was for a long time, it was just kind of a fixed number who were long-term POWs. But I've been a leadership consultant for a coach, trainer, written books on it now for more than 20 years. And when a leader has character and is genuine, authentic, then people know they can speak their mind, but also when the leader makes a decision, they're going to be loyal to it, because they know that the leader is trustworthy. They're not doing something that's unethical or covering for themselves. So it's much easier to have trust and teamwork and be able to have that camaraderie, but also have some friction. We call it creative conflict. I actually help teams learn to have creative conflict, because creative conflict will keep you from making bad decisions. In this particular case, there's one story where Bull Simons was concerned about the weaponry that was how they're going to destroy those guard towers. And one of the Air Force guys said, well, we got miniguns. We can come in there and blow them up with it before we even hit the ground. And Bull Simons said, well, show me. You better be accurate.
That's right.
And so the guys went out, they set up some guard towers, and the guys went out, and sure enough, they were accurate. And Bull Simons said, you got it. So it was like, it was an idea that Bull Simon didn't have, but somebody challenged him and said, here's how we ought to do it. And Simon said, okay, show me. And so that's the kind of creative conflict that good teams have, where you can push back and forth. If you're the leader and you don't want anybody to push back on you, you got a problem, because you're not the smartest person in the room. A lot of times on certain areas, a lot of people know more than you do. So you got to be willing to listen and then make your decision. If it's a decision at your level, you make that decision and you own it, but you've been willing to listen and maybe hear something that you didn't know that's going to help you make a better decision. And the military generally is pretty good about that. Not always, but pretty good. At least in the lower levels, I think pretty good about that.
Yep.
One other, I saw Drew's question about the other raid, the Bin Laden raid was similar in that they crashed into the compound. One thing you guys all ought to know is that the Son Tay raid has been the model for raids ever since. It has been the model of how to pull off a raid, because it was so well planned and so well executed, so well prepared for, that it's just been a helpful model along the way.
I have to talk about the intel. A lot of people think we didn't have very good intel, but they quit taking pictures with the SR-71 because they didn't want to tip off anybody that Son Tay was being looked at. But the intel that we had was good. I mean, there was a couple of things. I remember the CIA, when they made the mock-up of the compound, in front of the communications building, they actually had a little bicycle they had made. And that bicycle was only about 1.5 inches long. And the one thing, I was being from Missouri, the Oshkosh state, I had to see if that was really there. And that bicycle was there. Now, we took a chainsaw in to cut down the light poles for when we had our LZ coming back out. The only bad intel we had there was the light poles were made of concrete. So chainsaws don't cut concrete worth a hoot. So we had to move our LZ out a little further to get the birds back in for us. But other than that, we had pretty darn good intel on the whole operation.
One of the things that's contrasted Son Tay to me to a lot of organizations, as a lot of organizations are very siloed and people just know their job and just do your job and keep your head down, and you don't know what everybody else is doing. But you guys all knew everybody's role to the point that if anything happened, and it did, you immediately flexed and adapted and knew just what to do. You didn't have to go back to leadership and ask, what do we do? I think that's a really interesting model of the way you guys trained.
And that was so true. I mean, we had alternate for alternates, and everybody knew each other's task. And within red wine, green leaf, and blue boy, there were different elements within them as well. And when we went to Plan Green, we didn't even stumble. We didn't think about it. We just knew, okay, Plan Green, we've done this. And it was just like a normal exercise for us. So the training, one of the things when I talk to groups, we talk about training. Training is boring, but I tell you, training saved our lives because we had trained so much and knew that the alternate plan was just like a regular plan. So we marched on course with it. So it's important to train.
I love some of the leadership lessons from the book here, and lesson 2, your life is significant, so be excellent in everything you do. No matter how insignificant you think your job is, it could turn out to be a life-changing position. And you talk a bit about you weren't there to do guard duty, but you're doing guard duty well enough to get attention. And you didn't know what that would lead to, but you just stayed focused on doing your job well.
Well, one of them, before Dan Turner passed away, I asked him why he selected me as his RTO. And the one thing he told me, he said, whatever we ask you to do, you did it with a smile on your face, and there was no, oh man, I got to do that. And your attitude is as important as anything. And people with bad attitudes are not well received. And if you're going to do it right.
Yep.
I guess I'll ask both of you. Maybe we start with you, Lee. What are some lessons you took away from the raid?
Well, I published 14 in this book, 6 for leading yourself and 8 for leading others. This is Leading with Honor, Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton. And I tell my story, but I'm really talking more about the leadership and the lessons we learned from that. And they all apply today. All those lessons apply today to every one of us. Number 1 is know yourself. And it kind of comes back to a lot of what we've been hearing today. And that is that you have to learn to manage yourself. Terry managed himself. He knew who he was and who he wanted to be, and he managed himself in that way. So I think for me, just thinking about what you're talking about, I learned to do anything. Okay. In a POW camp, you never know what you're going to have to do. You might be washing the dishes. You might be sweeping the floor. You might be cleaning the crapper. Okay. And so we all had to do it or empty the bucket. In our 6.5 by 7 foot cell, we had probably about a 3 or 4 gallon bucket in our cell. And thank goodness it had lid. That was our toilet. And you had to empty it every morning. So, you know, you just learn to do anything, and whatever you do, you just learn it's part of life. Just go do it and do it the best you can. And so in my early life, after I came home, I'm willing to do anything. You know, if you want the floor swept and need to be swept and nobody else, I'll sweep it. It doesn't matter to me what I'm doing. If I'm contributing to the mission, then I want to do it. You know, my wife needs help, I go in and wash the dishes, and she cooks. Now our kids are all grown, you know, we're empty nest. And so I wash the dishes almost every night. Well, we have a dishwasher, but I rinse them off and put them in there because I just want to be a contributor. I want to be a good teammate. And if that helps her, it helps me. So, you know, I go at it. I think it's just, you know, I think Terry's team, they learned so much about being teammates and the camaraderie there. And I think in the military, we learned that anyway. But in the special forces, you do that. In the POW camp, you learned a lot about camaraderie and the value of taking care of your teammates. We lived in that cell, I told you, for 18 months with 50-something guys. And we only had twice when somebody raised their voice at another person. Can you imagine that? Okay. Wow. These are hard-nosed, aggressive guys, egotistical guys. And so, and both times they apologized before we went to bed. So we learned to live with each other and accept each other and to really focus on changing ourselves. We could see we weren't going to change them. They could change, but we just had to change ourselves and not worry about them. I wanted to mention, you see Eddie on your screen there. Eddie is a former Special Forces guy, and he's on our team now and does great work and does whatever needs to be done. Eddie does it, and enjoyed having him. So wanted to mention, I invited him in today because of his Special Forces background and knowing what it was going to be. So thank you all for having us today.
Yes. One of the things that I have always been strong on is humor. And I think the POWs, I love to hear their stories because they don't talk about their beatings. They talk about what happened after the beating or things like that. And their humor, their sense of humor, I think is one of the things that carried a lot of those men through. Yeah. And it's always a joy. I always look forward to hearing them talk. And, you know, at our reunions, they'll get together and start telling some, they may be war stories, but they're damn good ones. And I love the humor they bring to the table.
And that's one of your lessons you point out in the book, is that humor helps us get through tough times.
Yep.
So exactly. True. I want to throw out one more thing on that. Right now, we're almost, in the next 60 days, we'll be finished with the draft of a new book called Captured by Love, Inspiring True Romance Stories from Vietnam POWs. There are 20 stories, probably about 20 stories in there. Each one's one chapter. But one of the things we found out in these romance stories, it's about a third were married and divorced and remarried when they came home. And then the third were stayed married, and they've been married over 60 years, most of them. And a third were like me, were single and came home and got married. And we've been married 46, 47 years now. So out of that, though, humor was one of the big camaraderie, companionship, friendship, being able to tolerate each other and caring about each other like we do in the POW camps and the Special Forces, but also that humor is a big deal in those good relationships.
Amen. That is so true.
So Terry, let's close that with you. What are some of the lessons you took away from the raid?
Well, there was a lot of lessons, 20 years old. I look back on it and I think, I never had dreamed of ever being in such a involvement on growing up on a farm, going to North Vietnam never even crossed my mind. But I thank the good Lord every day for allowing me to be a part of such a historical event. But the thing that I learned the most is, you know, that each one of us is replaceable. And, you know, when you think you're so important that you can't be replaced, then you better start looking around you, because you're going to be replaced. And that's, you know, I always feel like if there's no job, like Lee said, you know, burning the crap or dumping the crappers, that's just, you know, that was part of your duty, and you did it, and you did it with pride. And I think anybody that gets the idea that they're greater than they think they are, then they got some serious problems, because you know, each one of us is replaceable. And I think that's really, in special forces, you know, we operate in 12-man teams, and we're cross-trained on each other's jobs. And that's the way it was in Son Tay. You know, we were cross-trained on the different elements that we were in. You know, I could have picked up the M79 grenade launcher and done what McGuire did. And in turn, he could have grabbed a prick 25 off my back and been the RTO. That's just the way we operated. And that's a part of what life is. You have to face what you can do a good job. If you can't, learn it.
Yeah.
It was awesome spending time with you guys. Just yeah, I could sit and listen to this all day. You got so many great lessons, and it's amazing reading the two books. It's like you guys got together and wrote them, because you hit a lot of the same themes.
Lee's a lot better writer than I am, though.
Not so. I loved your book.
Thank you.
A lot too.
I think the part of the book that I liked the most was the different, there's over 40 stories from POWs, Raiders, people that are on the support team. And that's something too that, you know, there was 109 men selected and only 56 went on the mission. But we had the support of all 109. And that was an important part of it too. You know, each one of us could be replaced, because Bull told us that night when he said where we were going, if anybody wanted to back out, now's the time to do it. And no one backed out, but they could have if they wanted to. But just, you know, you got to have faith in one another, and trust that the man next to you, to your left and right, is going to look after you as well. So.
You said in the book that if this was moderately dangerous, you didn't want to know what real dangerous was. Did he ever tell you?
No, he never let me know what that was. But we always kind of kidded about that among us, you know, what's the bull called real dangerous, you know? So, yeah, he told us we had a 50-50 chance of not making it back. That was at 20 years old. You know, a lot goes through your mind, not much in my mind, but the flight in, we had 3.5 hours to sit and think about it. And, you know, the guys were either praying or sleeping, and I think they were praying as we sat on the chopper waiting to take off and then land at Son Tay.
Well, thanks so much, guys. I love spending time with you and love hearing these stories. And I know everybody on here was positively impacted by what you shared today.
Well, thank you for this opportunity.
Great.
Keep spreading your word.
Very good.
Thanks, Randy.
All right. Thanks, guys. Everybody have a good weekend.
Yep, you too. Thank you.